Oh my gosh, that poor donkey. Also, sometimes you really cannot trust the narrator, especially when they're a supervillain. DC Universe's Doom Patrol, Season 1, Episode 2, Review and Breakdown. Hey y'all, it's your Twisted Girl next door here, and today I am doing a review and breakdown of Season 1, Episode 2 of DC Universe's Doom Patrol. Okay, so if you're new here, this is how it goes. I do my overall thoughts of the episode, the happenings, as in what happened in the episode, ship talk, because you know I love talking about relationships, predictions, because even if I'm wrong, I want to take a guess, and finally, I do comic book comparisons, because as you know or may not know, Doom Patrol is based off of comic book characters. Oh my gosh, this was so cerebral. I mean, overall, it was kind of like, in this episode, nothing really happened, but then again, like so much occurred in terms of us kind of getting glimpses of the main characters and some of the things that drove them, some of the secrets that they had been hiding from themselves and from each other. And also we got introduced to Cyborg in what I thought was a very innovative way. I mean, they could have paused everything and made it so that we were just focusing on Cyborg the whole time. But I think the show did a very good job of interweaving Cyborg into the plot line of getting Chief back, but also still getting us glimpses of Rita and Larry's situation, along with what the heck was going on with Crazy Jane this episode. And so there was a lot of stuff happening in terms of character development, and maybe not a lot happening in terms of plot push forward or progression. Cyborg. Okay, so we got an introduction into Cyborg Victor in this episode, and what we saw was that he, at the time, was still currently fighting crime in Detroit through the help of his father, and that was basically where he was stationed at with his dad. And so I guess in this timeline, you know, he's not part of a team, he's riding solo, and that he knows the Chief. So we get that kind of connection to Doom Patrol, and then he finds out that something happened where Chief was, or where he thought Chief was, so he goes to investigate, and he pretty much gets caught up in the mix of Mr. Nobody, who is awesome, and also getting introduced to the Doom Patrol. Yes. So all of that happened, and Cyborg decides to stay for a bit after the whole thing with the Donkeyverse. Yes, it was called the Donkeyverse. I thought this was a solid introduction to Cyborg. I mean, we got a glimpse of what he did in Detroit. He kind of is trying to find his own way. He's still very much, you know, I think I really enjoyed how the actor portrayed him, because he's not like, he's mature, but he's also kind of like this young superstar kind of guy. Like, oh, he's Cyborg. He's kind of already known, but he's still trying to get his footing. He's always kind of been in his father's shadow. And you see glimpses of that. But he's also sort of used to being the leader too. And you saw glimpses of that when he was butting heads with Robot Man. And so I like the fact that we got to see who Cyborg was as an individual, but then they interwove him into the plot line of the Doom Patrol, which is super dysfunctional, but it totally worked. I like that it seemed that him and Chief had a connection, maybe sort of like the dad he never really had in a way, because, you know, him and Chief got along together really well, and there seemed to be an understanding by Chief to understand where Cyborg was coming from. And we see that Chief kind of has that way about him with all the characters, kind of understanding their weirdness and somehow accepting them. And that's something that Cyborg is not able to get from his father. So it makes sense that they would make it so that, you know, Cyborg would feel a connection to go and try to help out, you know, his friend, someone who was something of a father figure. So I like the plot line. I thought, you know, the drama between him and Robot Man, where Robot Man didn't like him, where, you know, Cliff was not feeling him. And then also kind of, you know, trying to get introduced to Larry and Rita. They just kind of threw him in the mix. And I thought that was the best way to do it. And when Mr. Nobody was going into his mind, we got a glimpse of, you know, it was kind of interesting because, you know, Cyborg tells Mr. Nobody when he makes him relive this torturous moment when he is caught in the explosion and he loses his mother And we find out it was something that he caused. And, there's different origin stories when it comes to the Cyborg character, who is a staple in the DC universe. And so they went this route where, he has, very overbearing parents to a certain degree, and he's just trying to figure himself out, and the explosion happens. And we find out that maybe his motivations aren't necessarily his own. And so that was really interesting. And then he has to face off with his dad. So I think we're probably going to dive into that more as the show goes on. But it was a nice introduction to the character because he's not perfect. He's not a perfect character. And I like the fact that he's not perfect character, because I think it would be really hard to have this kind of perfect, upstanding character who maybe is a little brooding because he's half machine, trying to get along with these really dysfunctional characters. He'd always have to play, the straight man in that situation. And it's good that he can sometimes not clearly be the totally upstanding and logical one. We got a lot of focus on Crazy Jane. So when that whirlwind thing was happening with the hole that Mr. Nobody caused of sucking the whole town into the Donkeyverse, yes, the Donkeyverse, I will never get over that name of the Donkeyverse. I thought it was really interesting because, she went after Chief. She saw that Chief got thrown into the hole, and she felt compelled to not even think twice about it to go after him, which goes to show, even though when we first met her in the first episode, she was kind of talking back to him, she clearly has a fondness for Chief to want to go and save him. And so, this was an interesting sort of way to dig deeper into what Crazy Jane is, because in the first episode I had mentioned in my recap of that is that it was kind of confusing what her powers were and what superpower she had if you didn't know the background of the comics, right? Because nothing's really explained to you. Same thing with Negative Man, I sort of felt, right? You didn't know what these powers were when it came to these characters when they showed it, unless you knew the backstory. And I think this episode did a really good job with Crazy Jane of showing you in a way a lot of her powers, which the powers are crazy and super innovative. And I think they did a great job of showing that, but also showing that she's got a lot of trauma too. Then we have Mr. Nobody and his overall scheme that also saw us seeing Larry and Rita being tortured and having to face some of their internal demons. So yeah, I mentioned how Mr. Nobody had it so that Cyborg went through his stuff. But in this episode also, he had Rita and Larry face some of their demons, or at least allude to them in a way. And I thought this was a good plot line because, one, we got to see a little bit more of what Negative Man's powers are. Once again, like I mentioned with Crazy Jane, if you didn't know the backstory of the comics and you were just coming to this as a TV show, you might be a little confused on what exactly he does. So I thought it gave a better explanation. Larry, after the whole town got sucked in, he kind of was defeated feeling. And so he tries to leave town. But that inner thing inside of him, that electricity, that outer being that he got when he had the crash, basically was making it so he could not go anywhere, because we saw when that thing leaves his body, he can't function. So he kind of needs him in order to function. So he wasn't letting him leave town. So we got in this episode that clearly he has another entity in him that he doesn't really communicate with all the time. Although his venture into the Donkeyverse and having to kind of face his fears of living a double life and everything made it so that he took a step to basically maybe try to figure out how to communicate with this other being inside of him, which was progression, right? Because he was kind of ignoring it, kind of just being like, I have this thing, I don't ever want you to get out. And we also got to see Larry's kind of real face. And then with Rita, they sort of hinted at something with a baby. So I don't know if maybe she had some sort of abortion, or maybe something happened when she was, when she did have a kid, if she had a kid. They alluded to something. Mr. Nobody sort of alluded to something. And that was pretty interesting because, first of all, I thought it was super funny. Oh my gosh, the breaking of the fourth wall when it comes to this show and the meta at times is so funny because it's so self-aware, but it does such a great job of interweaving it into the plot line where it's not super distracting. And so he's narrating all of them. And that was just such a great mechanism to move the story forward, of him being the narrator and them being aware that he's trying to narrate their lives. And Rita's just like, I'm just going to go with this. And he's like, Rita is an idiot because she knows this is a trap and she's still doing it. And they're going off of each other. So it was just this kind of comedy that wasn't completely silly, but also worked for the progression. And in that baby situation, I don't know what that was about, but it definitely is something. And who knows, I think we're going to revisit it, but it was a good glimpse into maybe some of Rita's darker elements, which I think they'll revisit. So basically, it looks like Mr. Nobody doesn't want Doom Patrol to find out where Chief is. So then the question is, what is Mr. Nobody's end game, right? He seems to know everything about Doom Patrol, as we saw, even Cyborg. He seems to know everything about everybody, even though he's nobody. And, he's, as Cyborg said, he seems to be insecure about them, because why would he need them to stay away if he knows that he can defeat them, right? But then kind of nothing happened plot-wise. They went into Donkeyverse. He spits them out of Donkeyverse. More so, Larry's inner being literally comes out to save them and get them out of Donkeyverse. But it also is kind of like, well, what's the point? Why is he keeping Chief? What does he want from Chief? I thought he wanted Doom Patrol, but it's clear he wants Chief for some reason. And that wasn't really revealed. So it's kind of up in the air. Not that it needed to be revealed this episode, but it kind of showed once again with this episode. Plot-wise, nothing really moved along except getting Cyborg to Doom Patrol. But in terms of the characters, things happened. And is Donkeyverse completely gone because the donkey exploded? Jane and Robot Man. From the first episode, they were pushing this and they're still pushing it. And it's fine. I mean, I don't know if they built enough of a foundation for me to believe that Robot Man has become so attached to Crazy Jane. Maybe because he sees someone even more tragic than himself that he's drawn to her or something, because they had that one interaction and then it was her painting and then, yeah. So I don't know. Rita and Larry. Okay, so yes, I mentioned this simply because I think it's alluded to in the comic books or whatever that, he had feelings for her or that they were very close and whatnot, like I mentioned in my pilot review and recap. So they had a moment, right, this episode where he confessed to her that he fled away from her and that he felt remorse for that. So they had a moment. She was very forgiving of him. And I don't know if it was a romantic moment, but he clearly felt compelled to say something to her about it. Maybe they're just like really, really, really strong friends. Maybe. I don't know. I just, it was notable that he felt the need to tell her that he felt that he let her down. Rita and Cyborg. I know that seems random because Cyborg's only been around for a total of 45 to 50 minutes, but the only reason why I'm even giving this a thought process is because of the last moments in the episode and, him giving her a pep talk. Now, that might have just been Cyborg being a leader and letting her know you did good, but he didn't kind of say that to anybody else really, right? And so they, he kind of looked at her and she was kind of bashful a little bit. Don't know where that's going. Don't know if it's going anywhere, but I thought I'd give that a mention too. I have no idea. Once again, I am completely stumped. This show keeps completely stumping me because I don't know what to predict. Because I don't know what's really happening. Okay, so the only thing I'm going to say about the comic book comparison is that in this particular verse, they have it so Cyborg joins Doom Patrol, right? He's there, he's in Doom Patrol. Now, the difference is, in no other time in the comics has Cyborg ever joined Doom Patrol, right? Like Doom Patrol, I think Cyborg was like created maybe 10 or so years or maybe even 20 years or so after Doom Patrol had its first run. So he wasn't an original character in the Doom Patrol. And when we know Cyborg in some of his more current forms, he's usually part of Titans and he's a part of course, the Justice League, right? Yes. So I think this is the big difference here is that in a live action version is our first time seeing Cyborg with Doom Patrol, which means it's going to be completely new to all of us, right? His interaction, his involvement in the plot, whether you know Doom Patrol or not, or even if you know Cyborg like the back of your hand, this is his first time ever with the Doom Patrol. So that'll be an interesting concept because they totally put him in there. Okay, so what did you think of season 1, episode 2 of Doom Patrol? Let me know, comment down below. Do you have any predictions, maybe better than the predictions or lack thereof that I have? What do you think of Cyborg's introduction? Do you think he's going to be a good fit with the team? Do you think he works on the Doom Patrol? Let me know, comment down below. And also, be sure to subscribe so that you're the first to know when I post my videos of all things horror and dark fantasy. Thanks for watching. Let's get creepy together.